This is chapter 52 regarding Schoenberg. It's in our unit on secular song. This would put us into the 20th century. Actually, remember, say 1900 to 1945 is early modernism. 1945 to present is postmodernism. So this is in the early modernism. And Schoenberg is one of the perhaps three most important composers of the 20th century. Schoenberg was Austrian, right, from the country of Austria. Was highly influential in the movement called Expressionism. He believed in making music new by freeing dissonance from having to resolve to consonance, and eventually rejected tonality altogether. His target was atonality, no tonality, no center um, for the tone. That's why we say tonic, and it's a tonal center, and so there's no tonal center. And Schoenberg's song cycle, remember what that is, a group of songs put together with some unifying element to it, and the title is Pierrot Lunaire, and from his atonal expressionist period, incorporates Sprechstimme, which is speech-like melody, and Klangfarben melody, tone color melody, where the melody transfers from one instrument to another. And normally we have a melody played one instrument or one voice. So this is quite unusual. Why Austria? Remember, this is our Europe, and this is the country Austria, and Vienna is over here. And Austria was a country and a major power since the Middle Ages, like France and England and Spain. And on the equivalent footing, we don't think about Austria as being a significant power now, but for hundreds of years, it was an equivalent of Spanish, French, or the British power. And in the Renaissance, as a result of marriage, Spain was united with Austria and the Netherlands. It was three powerhouses, and they were unified. Austria was fought Napoleon like 3 or 4 times and finally defeated them. So Austria was a major country power, and with a lot of money and education. And then because you have money and education, you have extracurricular things like fine arts that are not all that important, but maybe they are. And Vienna is or was the home to Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, and then later Brahms and Mahler and many other composers. So there are, they call it the Schoenberg, they call it the second Viennese school, because the first Viennese school being Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven during the classical period, not so much in the Romantic period, but in 20th century Austria, that we have that second Viennese school with Schoenberg and his two students, Anton Webern and Alban Berg. So we have this kind of the East and West in Europe, but anyway, that's where Vienna is. This is a modern day picture. It's a beautiful city. It's very unusual with it. All the architecture is pretty much the same, this Baroque style. I happened to be here in the 1980s, and so impressive. You walk down the street like this, and then there's a flag outside one building, and it's McDonald's, and you don't know it's McDonald's unless you just see the flag that's hanging out, and you go in and it's a McDonald's. But beer is sold like every third store. You can get beer at at the McDonald's, it's just a common drink, and like every coffee shop also has beer. If you go into a barber shop, they have beer. You go in the Subway, they sell beer. They respect uh, alcohol in a different way, perhaps, than a lot of people do. But it's certainly a beverage that's um, part of the culture. I want to play a little bit of this song from the 1890s, perhaps, because it is telling of the style of music in Vienna at the time. And Vienna was considered to be a decadent city. And I was like, what does that mean? And I think it had so much affluence that people start to do uh, things that are out of the normal. And so this song, the style, it's you hear it and you think, wow, that's the singer sounds terrible, but it's half spoken and half sung, and they really bend the pitches for effect. And so if you don't realize it, you think it's bad, but it's actually part of the style. And it's unique as much as jazz is in the United States, where they fool around and bend the notes. So this, I think, is what Schoenberg grew up hearing, and he developed this technique of Sprechstimme, which is you half sung and half spoken in his art music, and you hear it in this song. Let's listen to it, a little bit of it.
Meine Nacht war's leidste Song, es war mit mir nicht zum Vertrauen. Es tut da und den Menschen leid, wie der Lund und wie er Draht. Kommt vor 3 gar nie als Haus, streckt sie dann bis 12 aus. Nachher sitzt im Café, trinkt 10 Gläser rum mit Tee. Du zum Recht, es ist so, ich bin ein rarer Kommilfo, doch ich bitt ob nur Geduld, der Mond da drum ist schuld. I und der Mond, der Midnacht, yours,
Expressionism has a large element of Sigmund Freud's psychology, who was also from Vienna. As a matter of fact, when we were in Vienna, I told you that we were walking down the street, and then there's a building like all the others, because all the architecture is the same, and on the outside of the plaque, it said Sigmund Freud's house. And it's like, Sigmund Freud's house? How cool is that, to be right outside his house and think that he walked in these streets and we're blocked from the Danube River, and he perhaps walked down there and sat on a bench and thought about things, or not. But Sigmund Freud's psychology is much part of expressionistic art. Expressionism is a lot of contrast, and it's often somewhat shocking and disturbing, with the goal of drawing you in to feel the pain of the subject matter. Quite the opposite of Impressionism, where it's like this impression of the light on me. This is more about, they want you to be drawn into the painting to feel the pain of what's going on in the painting. So Schoenberg, early in his life, his music was just late romantic. It was not that unusual. And as time passed, he got more radical with his music. And here's a quote from the textbook, and it's Schoenberg himself, in his own words, says, "Whether one calls oneself conservative or revolutionary, whether one composes in a conventional or progressive manner, whether one tries to imitate old styles or is destined to express new ideas, one must be convinced of the infallibility of one's own fantasy, and one must believe in one's own inspiration." And I think that's important, perhaps, to us to be realize that why do we do things sometimes? And people say, "Why are you doing that?" And you have this inspiration. It's like the fellow that has the old car outside, and he works on it in the weekends and puts a lot of money into it, and painting it and all these things that he's inspired to do. And people say, "Why are you doing that?" And so Schoenberg is saying the art is the same way with inspiration. Often I say it's more perspiration than inspiration, but he had an inspiration about atonality, and he followed his inspiration to its max, perhaps. We're going to hear his example of his music is Pierrot Lunaire, and it's a song cycle. And it sounds, I put here, off the map. Sounds like it's from outer space, and I don't know what music sounds like or from outer space, but it certainly is like out of this world, but does not use the latter fully developed serial technique. We'll learn what that serial technique is. So he starts just pushing music to an extreme, and then as far as dissonance, and then finally just abandons the whole idea of consonance and dissonance and just its atonality. So the emancipation of dissonance takes place here. It's like, wow, it's like dissonance is hiding in the corner, and it's like we let it out sometimes in the music, and it's okay, and then we go back to consonance. But here it's like dissonance it's all about dissonance and more dissonance and less dissonance, and there's not really any consonance. So he says you can end music on a dissonance. It doesn't have to end peaceful and rested. Here is an example of an expressionist painting done by Arnold Schoenberg himself. And Munch's The Scream, which we saw in another video, is similar to this, and the Scream was painted before this, so it no doubt had an influence on Schoenberg. The Scream, Munch was German as well. The thing also that when I had the map up there, I should have mentioned that even though Austria to this day and Germany speak the same language, Austrians do not consider themselves Germans. And it was like one of the first countries that was assimilated into the Nazi power. And they didn't really want to be part of that. Maybe the military or the political people did, but the common people did not want to be part of the Nazi organization, and they were kind of forced into it. And so they don't consider themselves German. They consider themselves Austrian. And here is a picture of Arnold Schoenberg, lived from 1874, sorry, that got messed up there, 1874 to 1951. His two students, Alban Berg and Anton Webern, they were more like worked together because they were not like 20 or 30 years like the teacher and the student. They were maybe 8 or 10 years difference in their ages, and they all believed in basically the same thing. And so the three of them are called the Second Viennese School. So Schoenberg was in World War I. He was a soldier. And then later he emigrated to the United States and lived in the United States, became a U.S. citizen. He taught at University of Southern California and UCLA. So his early works are just kind of post-Wagnerian Romanticism, which we haven't heard yet to compare, but we will. And his second period is this Expressionism, and which he's focusing on dissonance and atonality. In his last period, he develops this whole concept of the 12-tone technique, where there only are 12 tones. If you go C, C sharp, D, E flat, I'll go all the way up. There's 12. By the time you get to C again, they're just 12, and C is the 13th note. So there are 12 different notes. And he said you write a piece of music starting with a tone row, which is the 12 tones you decide in what order they're going to be. And mathematically, there only are so many. It's more than 100,000, but I believe. But there's an infinite number of ways to put those 12 tones together, even though it's the same row as far as rhythm and timbre. And he wrote, I don't know if he wrote any sacred music. He must have, but mostly secular music. Operas, choral music, chamber music, piano music, orchestral music. And again, expressionism is this fascination with the unconscious, the depths of the human psyche. Sigmund Freud, and so what motivates us to do things. And then examples in art where painting, Edvard Munch, right, with the Scream, and literature, Franz Kafka. We'll look at a little about his style, but a writer that was an expressionist writer. And so in music, how does he use expressionism? Large leaps in the melody, using instruments in not their normal ranges, having a bassoon play at a real high level or a trumpet play unusually low, and to get a different timbre than we normally hear from that instrument. Anne Kafka, who lived from 1883 to 1924, was a German-speaking bohemian novelist and short story writer, widely regarded as one of the major figures of 20th century literature. His work fuses elements of realism and the fantastic. It typically features isolated protagonists facing bizarre or surrealistic predicaments and incomprehensible socio-bureaucratic powers. It has been interpreted as exploring themes of alienation, existential anxiety, guilt, and absurdity. His best-known works include The Metamorphosis in English, The Trial of the Castle. The term Kafkaesque has entered the English language to describe situations like those found in his writing. And I encourage you to read something by Franz Kafka because it's just so weird. Here is the expressionism of that Scream. We've seen this picture before, 1893. And another example of expressionism, Gustav Klimt. These are all, because expressionism is a German contribution to art, as opposed to impressionism is French. But in expression, a lot of times there's distortion or something that's just weird. Now, again, this is expressionism called The Kiss, and this is also Gustav Klimt. And, well, he's barely able to see that it's a man and a woman. This is from 1908, and one of the pieces of music that he played, and we'll sample just a little bit of it, but this was a reaction of the crowd from December 21st in 1908. And this was it written in the paper. And it said, the contest between those applauding and those hissing regarding his performance of Schoenberg's music, which traditionally accompanies every Schoenberg novelty, was particularly bitter on this occasion. So a lot of people were complaining, and there was a group of people that were protesting that he was producing music like this. So the second movement of this piece that was performed was interrupted by a howl of laughter from Schoenberg's opponents, who were called to order by barbed comments from his many disciples. So it was people yelling at each other at the concert. After the third movement, in which a vocal part is added, vehement cries of stop from the neutrals mingled with the row from the opposing factions. So people were grouped together. You sit with your friends and you can say, that sucks. And other people say, wow, this is really cool. And so there's problems. 4 years later, in 1913, during a performance of his chamber symphony, other comments, and they're actually at this concert, there were performances of music by Elbenberg and Anton Webern and others. So it was one of these avant-garde concerts. It says the audience was restless during the Schoenberg and derisory during the Berg. Shaking his fist, Anton Webern became involved in a verbal altercation with some members of the audience. The tumult grew. A senior member of the police who was present mounted the podium to call for calm, but to no avail, and the concert was abandoned. Wow, that's pretty extreme. So this is a piece of music that was performed at that concert where they were complaining. Let's listen a little bit of this. And this is actually from 1908, but at the concert we're talking about was 1913. And it's starts to sound very dissonant, but it's not that extreme to our ears. And you might think about it, it's like, well, that's something I hear in music from a movie or a similar situation. But this is early on in his career. Let's listen to this, 1908. Just a little bit of it. The whole piece is like 20 minutes long. More comments from the newspaper. Other reports of frank discussion between works, whispering during the performance, booing while also applauding. How can you boo and applaud at the same time? Impatient jangling of house keys, large ones, large keys, to ostentatious walking out during the concert. The ultimate rudeness. Later, musical biography routinely presented the composers as unfair victims and occasions as hard-earned badges of honor, and later performances that were reasonably well received. Sometimes people just want to protest and make sure that their opinion is heard, and to cause trouble, right? Unfortunately. We saw this slide in another video lecture, but the important part about here is these three pieces of music that are seminal compositions in the 20th century. Remember, we said Debussy's The Impressionism, the Prelude to the Afternoon of the Faun, 1892. We haven't heard that yet. Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring from 1913, which he was influenced by Debussy's Impressionism. And then Schoenberg is the third one, no order here, the song cycle Pierrot Lunaire from 1912, and it's an example of expressionism and the abandonment of tonality to create atonality. So it's like this Debussy, Schoenberg, and Stravinsky, and it's French, German, and Russian, and it's about color.
Motion detected at the front door.
It's about color. It's about pitch. And it's about rhythm. The three above pieces introduced radical style changes from what came before, and the above three compositions changed everything. Possibilities were endless. The piece of music by Schoenberg we're going to listen to from 1912 is a song cycle. I write unnumbered songs, I think it's 21 songs. And they're tied together because they're all about this character called Perrault, and he's one of these. He's a clown. It's not a real person. It's just a made up figure that's part of the folklore that's commonly known in Europe. And so it's about this clown, Perrault, and his experiences mostly at the night, right? The lunaire is with the moonlight, and so it's a lot of this bizarre and macabre content in the words. Again, it's this expressionism, guilt, depression, atonement, playfulness, and so it's a parody, right? So it's kind of a satire on Perrault. And the poetry is written by this Belgian writer, Giraud. So it's 3 groups of 7. Each poem is a rondeau, which is a form from the 15th century, 1400s. We talked about rondeaus earlier in that period. And so it's for a small ensemble, 5 players, and they play 8 instruments. Sometimes a player his job is to play one instrument and another instrument, maybe an oboe and an English horn, and then trade off as the composer calls for it. Or like clarinet, bass clarinet, violin, viola, cello. So 8 instruments, 5 players. No repetition of instrument combinations. And you'll hear that Sprechstimme, which is half spoken, half sung. And this Klangfarben melody, where the melody is not performed by one instrument, it's this instrument, then that instrument. So the notes are passed around, and it's very confusing that it's actually connected to be a melody. Here is a painting by Picasso of this clown, Perrault, from 1918. Several years later, he did this. No connection between Schoenberg's work and Picasso, other than they both focused on the same character, same folklore character. And we're going to sample 2 of these songs. In the text they have us listening to, number 18 is from the 3rd group, 7, 7, and 7.
Motion detected at the front door.
And this is called, in English, Moonfleck. And it's weird because it's about Perrault, who has this black jacket on, and it's like a velvet. And he is out at night under the moonlight, and the moonlight is reflecting off the jacket. And he keeps thinking it's a spot on his coat, on his black coat, and he's keep trying to get it off, and he can't because it's the light. So he gets real frustrated. White fleck on his black jacket. I'm not going to read the words. You should take a look at the words. Let's listen to number 18, Moonfleck, from the 21 song cycle called Perrault Lunaire from 1912 by Schoenberg.
Einen weißen Fleck des hellen Mondes auf dem Rücken seiner schwarzen Rockes. So spaziert der rotenblaue Abend, aufzusuchen Glück und Abenteuer. Plötzlich stört was an seinem Anzug. Er bezieht sich links und findet nicht dahin. Einen weißen Fleck des hellen Mondes auf dem Rücken seiner schwarzen Rockes. Warte, denkt er, das ist so ein Gipsfleck. Wischt und wischt, doch bringt ihn nicht herunter. Und so hält der giftgeschworene weiter. Bleibt und bleibt, bis er den frühen Morgen
I think it's curious when you watch the video, you see there's a lady in the front row, and the look on her face is very telling, and she just doesn't know whether should laugh or be disgusted, but she's amused for sure. So that's an interesting side note there. And this is number one from they're very, very short, each one of them. This is number one, Moonstruck.
Den Wein, den man mit Augen trinkt, gießt nachts der Mond in Wogen nieder. Und eine Springflut überschwemmt den stillen Horizont. Küster, schauerlich und süß, durchschwimmen ohne Zahl die Fluten. Den Wein, den man mit Augen trinkt, gießt nachts der Mond in Wogen nieder. Der Dichter, der die Andacht treibt, berauscht sich an dem heiligen Tranke. Gen Himmel wendet verzückt das Haupt. Und taumelnd saugt und schlürft den Wein, den man mit Augen trinkt.
So Expressionism is a style of visual art literature in Germany and Austria in the early 20th century. The term is sometimes also applied to music, especially composers of the Second Viennese School, Schoenberg, Berg, and Webern. What is a tonality? Total abandonment of tonality, which is centered in the key. Tonality has a tonal center, and the music is typically will start in that tonal center and then move away from the tonal center and then back to it and away and back. And so it's kind of like a home that we keep coming back to. And Schoenberg's whole concept of things is to have atonal music, which moves from one level of dissonance to another without areas of relaxation. It's just dissonant, 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 and not what we're used to hearing. And the definition for Sprechstimme, a vocal style in which the melody is spoken at approximate pitches rather than sung on exact pitches, developed by Schoenberg. And I hear that in that song earlier on in the video. That's the end of our video lecture on chapter 52.